Hello and welcome to this Cask Meets Craft virtual roundtable, brought to you by Theakston's in celebration of Cask Ale Week. I'm Ed Bedington, editor of leading pub trade title The Morning Advertiser, and I'll be your host for this evening's festivities. We'll be hearing from some leading experts in the cask and craft beer sectors on the current market and how the COVID crisis has helped to shape the way we purchase and consume beer. The aim of the discussion this evening is to explore the relationship between cask and craft and see what the two camps can learn from each other. To help me do this, I've got some superb guests lined up, and let's quickly introduce them. In no particular order, we have the wonderful Simon Theakston, representing the fifth generation of the Theakstons family. Simon has been heading up one of the UK's leading breweries since 2003, guiding and growing a brewing heritage of almost 200 years. Next, we've got the editor and publisher of the OnTrade Preview, Cat Fergusson. Cat has been an avid fan of well-crafted ales long before the term craft became a subject for debate. She oversees the industry's annual drinks report, which aims to inspire licensees to take pride in delivering a superb cask beer experience. Joining us from the craft sector, Greg Hobbs is a well-known figure in those circles as co-founder and head brewer of 5 Points Brewing. Greg and his team take cues from the traditions and heritage of real ale to provide some of the best products in the modern craft movement. And last but by no means least, we have pub legend Chris Jowsey, CEO of Admiral Taverns. Since joining Admiral in 2019, he's led some major deals, which has seen his pub company grow its estate to over 1,600 pubs. With over 19 years experience in pubs and brewing, he brings a lot to the debate. So guys, thanks for joining us, and let's crack on, because obviously time is against us. Let's kick off with the first question. Essentially, how do you think the pandemic has impacted on purchases of cask ale and craft beer, both on trade and off? Greg, do you want to just take that to start off with? So how have you found the pandemic's hit trade?
Sure, thanks, Ed. I don't think it will surprise anyone that when the lockdown was announced in March last year, cask sales just literally fell off a cliff pretty much instantly, and we were left with a sort of a warehouse full of cask beer that we couldn't sell, and with no sort of view of when the pubs would reopen. It sort of looked a bit of a scary picture. On the flip side of that, our small pack products steadily increased in sales through the off trade, really. We're a draft led brewery. We're sort of in normal times 80% draft, 20% small pack, and during the pandemic, I think that basically flipped on its head, and we had to sort of very quickly work out how to package more beer to go into the off trade. With the sort of the cask ale in particular, it's just you can replicate that at home with mini casks and mini kegs, but it's never going to be the same as walking through the door of a pub and drinking a well-conditioned, well-looked-after pint of cask ale. And for me personally, that was one of the main things I was looking forward to of lockdown ending, amongst seeing family and friends, was the ability to get into a pub and drink cask beer. I don't think it's plain sailing just yet. I think with the sort of the levels of trade as they are, it's cask beer in particular is still looking a little bit on edge in getting the turnover, and the throughput of the cask beer is can prove tricky for some pubs until they're sort of back up to their previous capacities.
Absolutely. And Chris, as an operator of pubs, I mean, what's been your experience? Obviously, cask is very reliant on that in the pub trade, and was closed and denied to us for quite a bit of time. So what's your thoughts?
I think it's been, obviously cask suffered hugely, as Greg's just said. I suspect with the off-trade going great guns, when pubs were closed, then actually, you saw premium bottled ale selling probably plus 20, plus 25% in typical months when pubs were closed. So that, there was still access to ale, whether it was cask conditioned ale in a bottle or whether it was craft in a can, for example. I suspect since reopening, well, I know in our pubs certainly that cask has really suffered, partly because of the short shelf life, obviously, and the volatility of and uncertainty around when people were coming back and in what kind of numbers they'd come back. So I think most licensees have been really quite hesitant to take on too much cask too early. I'm picking up the growth though now, so I think we're seeing that coming back as more and more people come back and trade sort of picks up again. And I think, you know, most of the community pubs are back strongly rather than city centre pubs, and most community pubs would carry, if they're a good community pub, would carry a Cask Ale or 2 or 3 or 4. So I think that also helps. What I think is quite interesting though is if you look at what happened during lockdown, then a lot of breweries were doing, you know, direct delivery online or just direct delivery to their locality. And I think a lot of really good relationships were built up between communities and their local brewer, which I think is a good thing in the long term. And also I think it allowed us to experiment. So I know I had my younger, when I say younger, I had my kids at home. They're all over the legal age of drinking, obviously. But they were encouraging me and I was encouraging them to try different beers from different breweries during lockdown, because you could, so in that sense you had a wider choice, and I suspect that benefited a lot of good craft ale brewers as well.
And did you see a boost in sort of, or a spike in cask once the pubs got back open and people were able to actually go back and have a properly conditioned pint of cask?
Yeah, I mean that was, as Greg said, that was the first thing an awful lot of people wanted. Without a doubt, there was a big spike then, but I think we're still about, you know, anywhere, depending on the nature of the pub and the pub company, you can be anywhere between 20 and 40% down on cask currently compared with pre-COVID. But I think that's all about the caution that most licensees are using, because they're just terrified of having beer that, you know, goes out of date, and they're all, you know, they've all got really bitter memories of having to destroy millions and millions of pints during when lockdowns kick back in. So I think it's licensee driven rather than consumer driven, and I do see as time goes on and we get further and further past the pandemic, then I think cask will come back strongly.
Simon, as a major producer of cask, I mean, what are your reflections on the last sort of 18 months or so?
Well, very much like the previous contributors, it's been an unprecedented period of time. Never in living memory, and certainly in generations, has the industry faced anything like this. We lost 80% of our business overnight, pretty much, and we sort of put all hands on deck to contain the business as best as possible during that time. But what was interesting was to see how the demand for draft product through mini kegs and beer in the bag went through the roof, and our visitor centre staff overnight became fulfillment officers, effectively satisfying demand for huge amounts of bulk ale all over the UK, which was very gratifying to see. And you know, we grew our e-commerce sales by a factor of 100, which is colossal and required quite a major change in the way we operated. And I would agree also with the points that have been made earlier about the nervousness in the trade about taking on Cask Ale coming back. And if you recall, the early first time when the pubs reopened in April, it was actually the gardens, so people couldn't actually see what was on the bar. So, and given the wide variety and range of cask ales, it would be impossible for consumers to remember everything. And that, combined with the licensee's nervousness to have a product with only a 28-day shelf life, meant that there was a great restriction on cask ale and nervousness around. And I think that will continue for some time until people are completely happy that all restrictions have been left. One thing I did learn also in the lockdown was how much we all missed pubs, not we in the trade, but we consumers. And if ever there was a time when pubs as a force for social cohesion was evident, then the time of the shutdown was the time it was made so clear. People miss being with other people. They miss going to pubs. They miss enjoying the banter, the conversation, meeting friends, acquaintances, whatever it may be, and just a chance opportunity to meet people who may be new friends. And that is the importance of the role of pubs. And it is in pubs that only cask ale can be found. And so closing pubs and the future and the current state of cask ale is very much intertwined. And so we are very optimistic that when people rediscover pubs, cask ale volumes will begin to recover strongly, because there's no finer manifestation of a long alcoholic drink than a pint of traditionally brewed cask conditioned beer, in my view. So one can only hope, one expects things to return back to normal in the fullness of time.
And one quick thing, Simon, on you mentioned the e-commerce and the fact you were selling a lot online. Has that maintained momentum once the pubs reopened, or have you seen that fall away?
It's drifted off a little bit, but not much. And in fact, what I should have mentioned also is our off-trade sales have gone through the roof pretty much. There's people who couldn't go to pubs, wanted to buy beer, they went to supermarkets. So our off-trade sales are huge, or much bigger than they were, shall I say. And now pubs are reopening. We've seen the off-trade sales remaining quite high levels, higher than they were before. And indeed, our e-commerce sales have fallen, but not to the extent that we anticipated. So I think, taking Chris's point, people have had the chance through buying through other means to taste our products the first time and rather enjoyed them. And maybe it's wishful thinking, but people are coming back and buying more, which is wonderful.
Fantastic. Cat, coming to you. I mean, what are your thoughts on the last 18 months? How's that gone?
Well, I mean, it's hard to add much to what everybody has said. I think it's, obviously cask conditioned ale can only be sold in pubs, and pubs have been closed for the best part of 18 months. So I'm interested to hear what Simon says, that the off trade and the demand for the e-commerce has been maintained, and I think that is partly because people have been able to try stuff that they wouldn't have tried before. But I think there's also still a lot of caution, definitely from the licensees. They will never forget the sight of all that beer going down the drain. I don't think any of us ever will. It chokes me up just thinking about it now. But also there's a lot of caution on the part of the consumer. People aren't going to pubs in the same way that they were. It is from getting much more so, but there is still a lot of caution in a lot of places. And I think, as somebody mentioned, the community pubs, people are back there, they need each other, they need the support, but there's a lot of city centre pubs where people are just not socialising, not going anywhere. A lot of people still working from home, so I think it's not over yet. No. The figures that the BBPA released this week were absolutely horrendous. But it bears mentioning that those are numbers up until July, when pubs finally were allowed to let people in to come up to the bar and see what was available. It would be very interesting to see what has happened since then, and what's going to happen now. Cascale Week hopefully has focused people's minds a bit more, and of course we are coming into what is traditionally beer drinking season, so watch this space.
There's a season for beer drinking.
Apparently.
Yeah. Don't tell my wife that. Chris, actually, on thinking about what Simon was saying about the caution, are you seeing that caution from your tenants when it comes to sort of stock levels of cask and things like that?
Yeah, there's definitely two things going on, as Kat said. The first one is the over 55s are the slowest group of people to come back to pubs for all the obvious reasons. I mean, they are starting to come back, but it's taken a lot longer than the younger ones who came back immediately, more or less. That's the first point, and I think that impacts on demand for Cascale as well. The second point is in many pubs, they'll take one or two maybe different casks, but in the past, pre-COVID, they might have had 3 or 4, and I think that's all about just being so uncertain about not just how many people are coming back, but when they're coming back, because a lot of those patterns have changed. It's gone earlier in the day. Some days are better, midweek slightly better, weekends slightly worse, when pubs would traditionally be very full. So everything is very uncertain still for many licensees. And I think in that environment, they are cash strapped, they're recovering from the closure periods. So they are unwilling to kind of risk putting some money out on a product that has a very short shelf life in the cellar and even shorter on the bar. Now, that will be overcome, but I think it will take a little bit of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've talked a lot about cask in this one, so let's maybe have a quick look at the craft sector. I mean, it's no secret. I mean, craft beer sales have been meteoric in recent years, admittedly off a fairly low volume. But what do you think is driving that? Maybe Kat, do you want to kick off with that one?
Well, I mean, craft beer, whether it's cask, keg, bottled, canned, whatever, it's clearly benefited from the overall consumer interest in fresh, local, independent. Whether you're talking about bread or beer, it's a movement. It's not going away. It's just gaining momentum, and I think that's been a tremendous boon to the whole craft beer sector. When you're talking about cask, I do think that modern craft beer, it's a bit controversial maybe, but modern craft beer really has benefited from. It's had a boost from a few years back. There was a massive interest in Cascale. It was in growth again. Everybody was interested in it. Pubs started putting on more and more hand pumps. They thought that the quantity of hand pumps was more important than the quality of the beer, and people started getting bad pints. It became very London in particular. I know I never had a bad pint in Yorkshire, I have to say, but in London you had to look for, you had to know your pub, and people turned to keg beer or packaged beer because you knew you were going to get something. You knew what you were going to get. It was less of an experiment. So I think that has been a tremendous boost, and I don't think that that in some ways what we were talking about earlier about the fact that people are having less beers on and are being more reluctant to increase the range. I hope that will have a long-term effect, and people will only gradually increase the number of beers, and we will see the right number of beers being sold for the throughput, and that will benefit cask.
Helps sort the quality out in that sense. I mean, Simon, as a traditional brewer, I mean, how do you view the craft movement? I mean, I know you would probably argue that you are the original craft brewer, but how do you see the young upstarts?
I don't see these young upstarts as exactly. I do claim to be the first craft brewer, I have to say. But I think the whole movement started in America, 20 odd years ago, when the federal authorities permitted for the first time the growth of small brewing companies in a market which was dominated by huge, massive brewing companies. And the small brewing companies, in enormous reaction to the kind of beer that was brewed by the bigger ones, produced a wide variety of really interesting flavored beers with their wonderful heritage of hop growing in America, combined with different styles of beer, different alcohol levels, and it became a hugely popular movement in America. And quite a lot of these brewers in America actually learnt their, if not trade, their appreciation of beer from their travels to Europe and the United Kingdom. And so in a funny kind of way, we exported the craft movement to America. They then did the American bit on it and re-exported it back to the UK. And what it's done is to create an explosion of interest in ale as a category, allowing people to experiment. I think in the UK, with a bit of help of government support in setting up microbrewers since 2002, we've seen a huge number of entrepreneurs come into the sector, trying all sorts of different styles of beer, creating interest amongst consumers who would never really consider ale before. And to be honest, it's to be celebrated. It's a wonderful thing that people are now appreciating ale for the myriad of permutations that are possible with the four key ingredients. And so, we welcome it. We think it's wonderful. And in fact, we should never forget the fact that a lot of our consumers love drinking our beer week in, week out. And a lot of people are traditionalists in terms of beer drinking, but equally, there are loads of people, new people coming to the sector that want new craft products, new styles of beer. And ourselves, even us, we are producing new styles of beer. We've introduced a beer called Summit in the summer last year, which has 4 American hops in it. We use a hop infuser, and we sell it at a slightly colder temperature than normal. So we're doing new and interesting things with Cask Ale. And indeed, when it comes to other beers, we've got a beer called Barista, which is a coffee stout, which is something that perhaps we would never have had the opportunity to do before, were it not for the massive growth and interest in the craft sector. So it is a fascinating period of time we're going through, but we've been in this business long enough to realize how these trends come and go, and who knows what might happen in the future. But at the moment, it's very exciting.
Exactly. So, Greg, I mean, you've helped to inspire the movement and innovation within those traditional brewers. I mean, why do you think that the craft movement has been so embraced in the UK?
I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said so far by Simon and Cat. I mean, I think also, I think the format of it, most people would see it in keg these days. There's craft beer and keg are kind of synonymous, keg ale. And I also think there's something to be said for the fact that it's served at lager temperatures with the same sort of carbonation as lagers. It's not a dissimilar product for someone that grew up drinking, the big mainstream lagers that were around and still are around. It's less of a sort of leap to maybe Cask Ale if it's not something you're familiar with. I sort of, the first sort of foray into beer drinking was Cask Ale, and it's a format that I love and will always continue to love. But that's not necessarily true for a lot of beer drinkers these days. And I think that sort of similarity with sort of lager products it definitely has helped to sort of gateway beer into sort of more flavorful ales and that sort of thing. But otherwise, I think there's a lot to be said for the provenance and the independence of the breweries and knowing where the beer has come from, and that the people behind it are passionate about it. It's not a product that's made to be consumed. It's made with passion for people to experience and enjoy, and share the sort of the knowledge about as well.
It's interesting you sort of say it's accessible, because I mean there are some fairly inaccessible craft beers out there as well. There's a lot of challenging points, and rightly so. I guess that's where that innovation is driving the market, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Simon made the point that there's 4 ingredients in beer, and it's one of the things I love about the industry so much is that we all use the same 4 ingredients, sometimes a few more as well, but just the depth and range of beers is incredible. The amount of different flavors you can get from those 4 ingredients is quite something. And I think it goes back to the points that were being made earlier about the lockdown, people drinking at home and being a bit more adventurous and a bit more experimental. And I think that is what the sort of the craft industry is sort of able to encourage people to try different things. There are some breweries that are bringing out different beers every week in different styles, and it's not what we do, but they're doing a really good job of it. And there is something out there for everyone, and people love that sort of search, I think, and finding beer that's right for them.
Absolutely. And Chris, I mean, what's your view of the craft movement? I mean, you're running admittedly your pubs are more in the traditional sector, and probably more likely to have a cask off. I mean, is craft a big thing for your guys?
In our pubs in aggregate, it's probably relatively small versus the wider market, because we are more community based in that sense. But even in our pubs, and it's growing, and in some of our pubs, it's absolutely critical. There was a really interesting thing, from a kind of pub perspective, hallelujah to craft, because it's broken the taboo around pricing. It really has, and actually, that's a good thing for licensees and for brewers and others, because when people are sort of willing to pay £5 or £6 for a pint of craft beer, then everything else can kind of float a little bit nearer to that price, and that really helps licensees and pubs. And I also think it's great because it's an artisan product in my head. So I think Cat said, whether it's bread or beer, people like local independent businesses that are doing things differently. This is very much an artisan product, brewed with love, and it deserves to be paid for in that respect, and therefore paid a little bit more. So that's great for the whole industry, for brewers and for pubs. And actually, it's good for consumers because it encourages more experimentation and more innovation. So hopefully that becomes a virtuous circle for everybody in that sense. So, you know, I as a drinker, I'm hugely excited by craft because I get to taste all these different beers, you know, a whole variety of different flavors, some of which I hate, admittedly, but a lot of them are just unbelievable, you know, and it's very hard. Most of us will have drunk craft, right? It's very hard to start on craft in an evening and move on to anything else because your taste buds are just looking for that great big burst, which many crafts bring. And I think if craft could become a little bit more sessionable in the way that cask has cracked, then, you know, there's a really interesting mix going on there. Then it could be very powerful.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, we tend to, there's been a little bit of a kind of train of thought that modern craft beer and cask ale are two opposing camps. Is that true? Is craft beer a competitor to cask ale, or is the relationship more complicated than that? Simon, what are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I think there's an awful lot more that joins us together than divides us apart. And I think I pick up on Greg's earlier comments about whether you're craft or cask, it's about the passion, it's about the authenticity, it's about the integrity that goes into everything that we do in terms of sourcing the raw materials, brewing it, using the guiding ethos that's been of quality that's been handed down from one generation to the next, as far as we're concerned. And these principles apply equally to a craft brewer as it does to cask brewers, such as our own. I think small batch is another way of just drawing ourselves together in terms of similarities. And to me, there is a lot of common ground between the two different types. You know, people argue, you know, what does it mean to be a craft brewer? And no one, I don't think, has come up with the final solution to that one, if I'm going to use that expression. But there is no way that anybody can define it, because all beers are brewed precisely the same way. Towards the end of the process, they differ, whether one becomes a cask or whether one becomes a keg ale. But it's all about the heart and the integrity and the passion that goes into championing the beer that you're brewing. And as I said earlier on, we consider ourselves to be the original craft brewer, although we're better known for our cask production, perhaps. But we do craft beers as well. So I think people try and draw a distinction between the different styles of beer, but I think that it's a red herring, that. And to me, there's far more that unites us all together than divides us.
Greg, as a craft brewer, I mean, how do you view that question? Do you feel that there's a bit of antipathy from the cask guys towards you, or do you think there's it's misplaced?
I think it's misplaced, to be honest. I agree with Simon. I mean, you know, I think we would be seen as a craft brewery, but you know, a quarter to a third of our production goes into cask in normal times, and we are incredibly passionate about cask, and we hold. Again, in normal times, we hold training sessions for our trade customers to show them how to look after the beer in the cellars, how to clean lines, you know, how we want our beer conditioned. You know, it's something that we strongly believe in. Now, not all modern craft breweries do a cask range, which I think is a shame. And I do wonder if we will see that change over the next few years. I think people are starting to sort of appreciate the more nuanced and more balanced. Not saying that all cask beers have to be nuanced and balanced, but I think those styles of beers, which I believe are perfectly suited to cask, I think we'll see a sort of resurgence of those. As Chris was saying, you know, there's a lot of craft beers that have huge amounts of flavour, sometimes too much, and you know, it's impressive drinking some of those beers, but I don't want more than, you know, a half to try it. You know, I'm not going to sit there drinking pint after pint of it on a night. But so yeah, I think it's a little bit of a misguided definition. I would say that cask is craft. It is the original craft, as Simon was saying. You know, it's a product that has so much love, and in some ways is more difficult to look after than keg beer, which, you know, we've also touched upon in this conversation already. Keg beer, you know, you have so much more time to sell it. It can sit on the bar. The bar has to be less involved, for better or for worse. So I mean, in current times of patterns of trade that are unpredictable, that's a real benefit to keg beer. But there is a real beauty in sort of looking after the cask beer in the cellar.
Is it fair to say though that the craft movement was certainly in the UK, not in America, but was partly in response to a reaction against cask beer and what we're seeing as, you know, your dad's drink, and craft was the young, funky, trendy kind of
definitely. Yeah, definitely. But I think there was a time where a lot of breweries were only doing cask. Small startup breweries were only doing cask. It's quite easy to get into cask beer. It involves less equipment and less capex, and there was a lot of bad beer around. There's a lot of great beer. There was a lot of bad beer, and people didn't understand it in the cellars either. So people were having bad pints of cask, and that's not going to do anyone any favors. And then sort of keg comes along that again is easier to sort of present to people and has the flavour and it is less likely to go wrong in the pub. But I do think that cask will sort of get stronger again and continue to be less seen as the sort of older generation drink, and just a brilliant expression that is so unique to this country as well. I feel optimistic about the future of cask. I know a lot of people don't. So.
I mean, Chris, and as a pub operator, I mean, what's the view from your perspective? You know, is it a craft versus cask, or is it just another extension to your offer?
Yeah, it's definitely not a competitor. I think it's a complement. The two work together. They often appeal to slightly different audiences, or even the same audience on different occasions. So actually having both on the bar means you can cover just about every eventuality. I think what's fabulous about it is, it's just reawakened interest in beer. Okay, it's just exploded. It became a movement. It's for those of us old enough, when punk arrived, it just changed the whole face of the industry in music. I think craft is doing something similar to beer, and actually that's really good news. Pre the craft movement, I was getting very nervous because most of the younger consumers were looking towards spirits, and for a whole variety of reasons, I'm not sure that's a great idea. I'd much rather my kids, for example, were drinking longer drinks, and I think it's more social in that sense as well. So, I think it's anything that encourages younger consumers to be interested in beer and to try it has got to be good for them and for pubs and for brewers.
Absolutely. And Kat, what are your thoughts on the two?
Well, I mean, the panel's unanimous, isn't it? I mean, they are not opposing camps, and I truly believe that a good craft ale, cask ale, is the ultimate craft beer, and it's not just because I'm an old fogey. I know that it's a lot of people divide it by age, but I don't know if the very influential craft beer channel have just launched a 5-part documentary, Keep Cask Alive, and that's I've only seen the first one, but it's clearly something that's getting everybody's interest, and most of the beer writers that I know, including ones that used to be very anti-cask and pro modern craft keg, whatever, are now realizing that a well brewed, well kept, well served, just as important beer, cask ale is the pinnacle of craft brewing. It's and anybody who wants to get into the argument of how do you define craft, really should read Pete Brown's book Craft and Argument. It answers a lot of questions, asks a lot more, but it basically, you can't define it. It is incredible.
I've deliberately avoided that question. I mean, so would you say that the relationship has matured then, Kat? Because I think when craft was first out there, it was quite an antagonistic approach, maybe on the marketing side from certain producers. Maybe should rename nameless for this, but do you think that relationship has changed then, and there's a more of a mutual respect now?
Absolutely. I think people's minds were focused pre-pandemic when cask started to struggle. And I remember being at a launch of the Cask Report one year, and there were a lot of beer writers there who had been frankly snide in the past about the whole Cask Report thing and cask, suddenly realizing what was under threat, and that they had been part of the the movement away from it. And I think there was suddenly a lot of very positive tweeting and blogging about the beauty of a good cask, a good pint of cask, which most people realise it is the ultimate craft beer, because it starts in the brewery, but it's an expression of the cellarman or cellar person's, cellar keepers art, really, to what comes over the counter, and that's where I think there needs to be more focus as people do start stocking more and more. I think brewers should frankly say, I'm not I don't want you to stock my beer unless I can be sure that you're going to stock it well, because I think that was what really, really damaged cask.
Yeah, no, it's there's interesting points we could pick apart in that, but we don't have a huge amount of time. Let's just if we could look at sort of lessons that could be learnt from modern craft beer, from cask beer, and vice versa. What do you think there would be? Chris, maybe do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think cask could learn from craft. I mean, I mentioned it already, particularly around pricing and the way that they market a very artisan product. So there's no doubt about that. I think the way that craft approaches younger consumers, I think cask brewers could learn from. And dare I say it, the way craft approaches women and encourages women to participate in drinking craft beer, I think there's a lot of lessons for some of the more traditional cask brewers in that as well. Actually, that's probably a whole episode on its own, Ed. So I won't go any further on that. I'm sure that's true. And then going the other way, I think craft could learn from cask brewers, about quality and consistency and potentially sessionability as well, because I think that's where cask really shines. So it works both ways, I think.
And Greg, how about you? I mean, what would you say as a craft brewer? What lessons would you take from the cask side?
Well, first, I was just going to say I 100% agree with everything that Chris has just said. But I mean, I feel like craft industry there's a lot we're still learning from the cask industry, which is hundreds of years old. There's so much to learn there, and when we're developing new beers, more often than not these days, it's the historical styles that excite me and interest me, and not trying to recreate them as such, but trying to use them to make it have our twist on them and make a sort of modern example of that. That's something that really excites me. Is there's so much heritage, particularly in this country, but also around the world of beer that I think we could all sort of learn a lot from, and I think the craft industry could also learn a lot about balance and, again, sessionability from sort of the cask producers, basically.
Absolutely. And Simon, what would you say that you guys would learn as cask producers? Where do you think cask can learn from craft?
Well, I've been in this business for 40 odd years or more, and I still learn every day. So there's always something new to learn. And I would echo all the points that have been made already. One of the challenges we have selling, amongst other things, a traditional session ale, is that we used to supply product in a marketplace where beer drinking was not a lifestyle choice. It was very much part of the thing that people had to do because of the heavy industry we had in the UK. And at that point, the prices were always considered to be sort of affordable. Whereas what we have from craft nowadays is beer drinking, new beers being introduced at a time when people don't have to drink beer like they used to. It's a lifestyle choice, and therefore premiumization has been grasped by the microbrewer, the small craft brewers, in developing that opportunity. So the challenge we've got is how do we take a product that has historically done a job in terms of providing beer for a session into one that's more drunk less in volume but more in premium, and using that to try and to develop the value that is clearly there and which we must face up to remain in business. So I think there's a major lesson. I also think that that the traditional cask brewer have invested a lot in the sector, in the category, in terms of supporting licensees, promotional activity, sponsorships, community activity. And I'm not saying for the moment the craft industry hasn't done that, but I think it's a lot less collegiate than the traditional cask brewers. And I think the lesson that we could possibly show or teach the craft sector would be one to try and engage more in building the whole sector in terms of promotion, point of sale stuff, branded glasses, that sort of thing, quality point of sale material, quality pump clips, all these sorts of cues that help drive interest and premiumization.
And advertising with trade press. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, that's Monday morning.
Is it? Kat, I mean, what's your thoughts on what the two camps can learn from each other?
Well, absolutely agree that that craft has shown the way in terms of what people are prepared to pay for a better drink, and whether that's a scale of the quality of the beer, the strength of the beer, or what have you. I think that people have to be more open. In every other line, there are a variety of price points, but you go into most pubs and all cask ales are priced at the same, possibly a little bit more if it's a premium, but if it's a stronger ale, but generally, whereas. I think there's an argument for the better known beers or trendier beers or whatever beer is hot at the time, or cold preferably, can charge a bit more, and people will. Not everybody will wear it, but people will, and I think there's a lot of bravery, a bit like refusing to sell your beer to the wrong pub. There's a lot of bravery on the part of both the brewers and the licensees to do that, but it needs doing. That's a big lesson. I think in terms of what cask can learn from craft, modern craft, is that, and the very term cask is archaic. How many people out of the industry actually know what cask is, what cask conditioned actually is? I really like the fact that the the Cask Ale Week have launched this pub fresh beer. I mean, that to me is much more. It's less archaic. It's much more understandable to the average drinker who doesn't really want to discuss formats and styles, and maybe even doesn't even want to discuss hops and brewing at all. They just want a nice drink and they want to know that it's pub fresh, and that way cask ale can differentiate itself, but keeping it simple, I think, is the
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually, because I suppose the conversation around cask ale has been dominated by I guess CAMRA and the amazing work that they did to really sort of bring that back, but I guess it's not accessible or as accessible as we would like to think to the consumers outside of those.
But even they realised that cask wasn't the word to use to the public. It's the campaign for real ale.
Exactly.
It's and that obviously has lost its relevance when you can't say that a keg brewed ale isn't real. But pub fresh, I think everybody's interested in fresh now, and it also leads into the fact that a lot of the craft is from the pub. It isn't just the craft of the brewer, it is the craft of the cellar keeper. And I think that's something that needs to be, a pride needs to be instilled in the people that serve this. Much as people are paying lots of money to baristas in coffee shops and good bakers of sourdough, it has to become a respected and admired.
Absolutely. I think I've had this conversation with people in the trade before, sort of saying, we sort of celebrate the barista skills, but we don't necessarily sort of celebrate those cellar skills. And the stuff that we can do in pubs. We should be making more of that. I mean, we've talked all about price, and Chris, you've certainly talked about this a lot. We've got some questions from the audience that were sent over to me earlier. One particularly sort of resonates, and that is that somebody's saying that generally in both supermarkets and pubs, Cask Ale tends to be considerably cheaper than craft beer. Why is that? And I know we've touched a little bit on this, but maybe we can elaborate somewhat. And should cask be commanding a higher price, or do we think craft beer is inflated and is going to come down? Simon, do you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, good question. I think that drinking cask ale has to be done in a pub, and if you want to have low-cost alcohol, you don't go to a pub to buy it. You go to a supermarket and get it. So going to a pub and having a pint of cask ale is part of a much wider celebration of humanity, if you like. You're going to enjoy your pint of beer, but you're going to be in a pub with other people, talking to bar staff, talking to customers, and it's the whole experience. So the pricing of a pint of beer is relatively inexpensive, given all the other benefits of a pint of cask ale, that is, given all the other benefits of drinking it in a pub. So I think,
So are we selling it too cheap then?
Well, I think yes, I mean, one always hesitates because not everybody can afford to buy lots of beer. But I did mention the point earlier on that historically, beer has always been the working man's drink at a relatively modest price. But given the world that we live in and the price increases that we've been able to achieve in recent years has been negligible, if nothing at all. So I think there is an argument that says that cask brewers have got a legitimate claim for premiumization on their product, particularly given that it's in pubs only that you can drink cask ale, and the licensees benefiting from that. So I think there's room for manoeuvre to benefit the brewer.
Well, what about you, Greg? I mean, you're sort of in both areas. You're saying you produce a bit of both. I mean, how do you view the price situation? Is craft a bit of a bubble that's going to burst, or is there room to move cask up?
I mean, there's certainly some sort of very expensive craft beers, and there's some very expensive ingredients that go into them. But I think a very sort of a simple way to look at it is that we produce both craft and cask, if you like, and it's exactly the same ingredients, the same love and the same care and attention to detail that go into both. And why should cask not be valued the same as the keg version of it? It feels like it is sometimes undervalued, and people expect it to be a sort of a cheap product. And although it should be accessible for people, it should command the sort of price that is worthwhile. There's a lot of ingredients and provenance that goes into that product.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, what are your thoughts on those pricing questions?
I would hope over the next few years that brewers and pub owners look to develop a premium part of cask. So I don't think you can just say, well, you paid £3 today, you're going to pay £4 tomorrow for the same product. Okay, just life's not like that, is it? Unfortunately. So I think that the challenge is, can we premiumize cask in the way that some of the craft brewers have premiumized, keg ale effectively. So it's the same kind of process, and to do that, there's going to have to be innovation. There's going to have to be ways in which you can differentiate between, if you like, standard cask and premium cask. So I think that's doable. I think lots of brewers have started down that route, and I think they can go further with that. And I think that'd be really good for the whole industry and for consumers who are looking for something that they believe, is the sourdough of beer. So, yes. And they're willing to pay more for that, as Cat said. So that's definitely an opportunity. I think pricing on craft, I would, if I was a craft brewer, I'd be guarding that pricing like a hawk, obviously. But I think some of it's to do with competition and quality. So over time, as it matures, I suspect the difference between a craft beer and the rest will probably narrow a little bit as the competition comes in. And as we all know, the big brewers, will be looking at that kind of craft area, thinking we want a slice of that if we can possibly get it. And love them or loathe them, they're quite good at making good beers and then marketing them. And again, I think that will probably bring some of the pricing down over time. But yeah, I mean, I think again, it's back to that. It's a special product. It's made with love, and people will be willing to pay more for it if they believe that.
Yeah, and I guess that we were talking about there, the bigger brewers come into it. That's why the craft industry kicks so hard against that, because they can see that coming down the line. I mean, Simon, is that something I mean, from a premium cask, is that something that's on your agenda?
Well, we yes, indeed it is. I mentioned a moment ago, we have a beer called Summit, which is a new cask ale, which is definitely premium. We use hops that are imported from America, from Washington State, and it goes through an extra process in the brewery, and it's dispensed on at a colder temperature. So all these stages in the process add to the value of it, and of course, we are expecting a premium price for it, and indeed we're getting it, and customers are coming back for more. So there's no sort of hesitation on behalf of consumers to come back to it. I think the industry as a whole is just nervous in itself, putting up prices and being confident about price positioning. And as I say, at the end of the day, this is about going into a pub and drinking a pint of beer with everything else that goes with it, and that is an experience which is well worth the cost of a pint of a premium ale.
Cat, what's your thoughts on the pricing situation?
Well, I agree. I think the whole category needs premiumizing. The keg has shown that it can be done, and Cask has actually been very slow to respond to that. But there will always be cheap beers for people that can't afford it, but there'll be cheaper pubs for people that can't go to the more expensive pubs. But premiumization has happened in every other category except for in Cask Ale, and I think I'm really, really pleased to hear about Summit and that it's going well, and I look forward to trying some. But I think that's the way it has to be. I agree with Chris. You can't just suddenly put £1 on a pint of something that somebody's been drinking or every day or even just once a week. So it does have to be new products, and there has to be a story behind it, and that I think is that's a big part of selling beer, is for the licensees or the bar staff to have a conversation about the value of the beer. And as long as there's still cheap beer available for people that can't afford it, then there should be fantastic beer available for people that don't mind paying a little bit extra for, as Simon says, not just the beer, but the privilege of being in somebody's public house.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another question from the audience. This is quite a good one. Theakston's brewery has been around for almost 200 years. Where do you expect the craft scene to be in the next 200 years? And if you had to pick a craft brewery to still be around 200 years, which one do you think it would be? Greg, do you want to take that one then? You can't pick your own.
I mean, what I find quite funny is that we're sort of seen as some of the slightly older guard of the sort of newer wave of craft breweries. We're not even 9 years old. We haven't been brewing for 9 years. Talking here with Simon Theakston, the brewery's been going for 200 years. I mean, it's amazing. If we were still here in 200 years, I would be absolutely gobsmacked. It would just be amazing. It's something that the craft beer industry is so young. It seems a bit incomprehensible, to be honest.
I mean, if you could go back to your great grandfather, Simon.
Yeah.
I mean, would he be the sitting there like Greg, or I mean, do you think that these guys are going to sort of carry that mantle forward as well, like you have over the next few centuries?
I think my great-great-grandfather had a guiding ethos about perfection of beer quality, and it was that sort of obsession with quality that is our driving force today. And I think flexibility, passion, authenticity, integrity behind everything you do, they're the key factors that will see people through to a 200-year history. We've been very flexible over the years. We've managed to get through 2 world wars and various revolutions on the way, and things have never been always great or always disastrous. We've been flexible in our approach, and we've innovated. We've brought out new products to meet the demands of a new generation, and there's no reason at all why I'm sure 5 Point Brewing won't be around in 200 years' time, because I'm sure Greg would acknowledge all these points I just made. I think we're very lucky. We've got a wonderful beer in Old Peculiar, which has international renown, and has been something that has increased the awareness of Theakstons across the world, which we're most grateful. But at the end of the day, it's down to what our lads do here in the brewery, and the attention that we pay every day, looking after our customers, looking after our, making sure our brewery works properly, and all these sorts of things, advertising, promoting behind our brands that have kept us going for nearly 200 years. It's not quite, it's 194 years we've been going, but it's near enough 200, I suppose, rounding up. But we're very much planning on future generations and hopefully being around for another 200 years. Wouldn't that be wonderful? 400-year-old brewery. But anyway, that's for future generations to worry about. But right now, it's about those key factors of quality, seriousness, obsession with quality, that is, and flexibility and passion. I think passion is probably the most important thing of all.
Absolutely. And Kat, what do you think? And does the craft sector have the legs for another 200 years? And who would you put your money on still being standing?
Oh, that's really the big question, isn't it? I think there's a strong chance that 5 Points will be one of them, but there are some very good quality brewers around. I'm pretty sure Theakstons will still be around and still being brewed by one of your descendants. But I think I agree with Simon. It's about passion, and it's about, if the next generation of either Greg's or Simon's brewers didn't have that passion, then sales would suffer, and somebody would snap them up, or they'd finish. So it's an impossible thing to predict, and I'm refusing to be born on which. Because I know I'd upset somebody if I didn't mention them. So, but I'm sure we'll all still be, or whoever follows on from us will still be drinking good quality beer.
Absolutely. Nice sidestep. Chris, your turn to sidestep the question. What do you think?
So the only thing I would add to what's already been said is I think the connection between the brewery and their local community, but also the rest of their consumers, is really important. And I think that's what will mark out the ones that have longevity. So, I'm a huge believer, for example, in brewery tap rooms. I've just seen so many do so well and build those connections. And I think if the local community and the people who drink the beer are really supportive of that business and that brewery, then that's what will give it the legs to carry on. So I would, I'm delighted when I see brewers opening a tap room on site, bringing people in to show them how they make the beer, what they do, how they do it, and actually having a human connection between the brewery and the local community, I think, is incredibly important. I'm quite excited, actually. Recently, I think some of the more traditional, long-standing brewers have started to really think about that and develop some fantastic kind of new tap rooms. I mean, Simon's got a wonderful visitor centre, and I've spent many a fantastic evening there. It's a lovely part of the world, and it's a wonderful place to drink. But I think a lot of the other brewers as well are now starting to build some really interesting sites, drawing on lessons from America. And I was very lucky once to go to Lagunitas near San Francisco and see how they built their business from really small startup to a huge business now, obviously. But it was very interesting that the tap room played such a pivotal role in their development in all sorts of ways. I think it's definitely worth brewers thinking about how do they make the most of that opportunity.
And we're also, of course, seeing a bit of a resurgence in brew pubs as well, aren't we? With that concept coming back to life. So lots of innovation and interest. I'm conscious that we are pretty much out of time, and Chris is also very keen to get to his local across the road. It's a 400-yard dash, I understand. So that is all we've got time for. I just want to say, I mean, lots of things to dig into on that, and I'm sure the conversation will keep going. There certainly seems to be quite a positive and vibrant future for both cask and craft, and lots of things we can be doing to improve and to challenge the sector to drive it forward as well. But for now, I'd just like to say thanks very much to all my guests, Simon, Cat, Chris, and Greg. Thank you very much for taking part in this, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Ed.
guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.